on this computer. All right, and we're live. I'm Atlas Oberon Ruiz. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am a journalism major in my third year here at KU with a theater minor, and I'm interviewing you for my class J415 multimedia reporting.
Okay, reporting or recording?
Reporting.
Got it. Okay. Excellent. And so what else I would like to know is, since now I'm interviewing you, where are you joining KU from? So where do you call home? And what is your favorite food?
I'm from a lot of places. I would call Lawrence home, but I'm from Harrington, Kansas, and even further back, I'm from California.
Okay. All right. Well, I will stop grilling you. I know that it wasn't my day to interview you, but we will do more of this. You're not off the hook yet, Atlas.
I'm all right with that. Whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Okay.
All right. So just, I know your name, but to maintain record, your name, pronouns, the position you hold.
Yeah, so my name is Kristopher Oliveira, and I go by Kriss or Kristopher. My mother would probably have preferred that most people call me Kristopher, but I would argue that most people do call me Kriss. My pronouns are he, him. I identify as a queer person of color or a Black gay man and a Black biracial gay man. And I currently serve as the director for the Center for Sexuality and Gender Diversity here at KU. Was that everything?
Yeah. On that same note of your position, why did you apply for that position?
Ooh, you're coming in hot today. All right, so that's a fantastic question. So a little bit, and I'm sure you're probably going to ask about background and those things too, but prior to joining the Lawrence community and University of Kansas specifically, I was and still am a doctoral student and now doctoral candidate in sociology at the University of South Florida. So completed coursework there, and my spouse accepted a job at NYU, New York University, here in New York City. I'm actually in Manhattan right now. So I was working remotely. The pandemic happened, so I started teaching online, also doing some research for one of my advisors' projects online. And once you get into doctoral candidacy, you're kind of at the point where you are qualified to start applying for faculty positions or staff positions, depending on what kind of training and background you have. And my background is in higher education administration. And so I have previously worked as an LGBT resource center, and I am a semi-involved member of the Consortium of LGBT Resource Center Professionals, which is a national organization for higher ed LGBT Resource Center folks. And so since I was an LGBT Resource Center director in 2016, 2017, I've been a member of that. And part of that is just being up to date on what jobs are opening where. And so over the last 3 years, as I was working through my program, I was kind of watching the job market and watching the different posts that my colleagues were sharing on that website and in the forum. And so sometimes I would see some that I'm like, absolutely not. There's no way in hell you could not get me to move to this place. And other times, positions would pop up where I was like, oh my gosh, like that's a dream place. And sometimes it's not because of the location, it's because of what the institution is doing. And so that is certainly the case with the University of Kansas. So I applied back in March. There was a slight freeze for the position because of COVID, of course. So everybody's taking those cost-saving measures. So I saw the position posted, and the thing that got me is I was like, whoa, these folks are doing something different. Their center is not called LGBT Resource Center. It's not called the Pride Center or the Rainbow Room or whatever the hell folks call it, right? It's called the Center for Sexuality and Gender Diversity. And so for me, that meant a different type of commitment that the university has, or at least is saying that they have towards supporting queer and trans students, faculty, and staff at the intersections of identity on campus. So when I saw that, I was like, absolutely, I'm gonna apply. I think that that is a fantastic place. I've never been inside of the state of Kansas. I think I may have driven through it once, driving from California. I may have driven through it. So through the interview process, I did not get to come to Kansas as one normally does. But I got to meet some really great people in the Division of Diversity and Equity virtually. And I was like, okay, let's do this. So now I'm in Kansas. Usually I'm in Kansas, not this week, but usually I am.
Yeah, travel happens.
Yeah.
And you brought up background earlier, and yes, I am going to ask about background. But first, what does your position as director mean to you?
Yeah, so, I would say that administrators often take a lot of different approaches to the way that they view their work. And I operate from a very feminist and egalitarian practice. So typically in higher ed, your director is the person that's doing the more lofty, upper level policy advocacy support work, building campus community partnerships, that kind of thing. And then you'll have somebody else like a programming coordinator, which our office does have, who does more of the on-the-ground, everyday interfacing with students, designing programs, supporting our student staff and our graduate assistants. We don't have our programming coordinator this year, once again, because of the hiring freeze. So for me, my work is really dynamic. Normally I would be doing that lofty stuff, but I love talking to students, which is why I was harassing you a little bit when we first got on. I want to know all about you. I want to know what are the things you need on campus, that kind of thing. So right now, my work looks different than what it'll look like a year from now or 2 years from now. Because right now, I'm really trying to get to know the campus in this really weird environment. And I'm trying to get to know students and trying to get to know all of my colleagues. So right now, the work looks like setting a tone for the center and setting a tone for what we want it to be and what we co-imagine it can look like together. And it also looks like designing new programs because in the last couple of years, it's just been a little bit kind of roller coastery with SGD because of different types of institutional support. So for me, being the director for SGD, I have to say that this type of work is my dream job. I even get a little bit emotional when I think about like, wow, like I get to do a career that is central to my identity every day. I get to meet like what I would have said as an undergrad is like all of the baby queers, right, who are coming through and who are just trying to like make this place a better space on campus. I love really being in sync with those ideas and figuring out how can I translate all of those ideas into something really practical that the whole community can engage with. So like one of those things is I'm trying to pull together, and now you told me you're in theater, so I'm going to make you help me. I need to email the theater people to help me do a KU coming out day program. And it is the silliest thing, but I'm going to be asking them to let me borrow a stage door. And I'm going to put it right on in front of the SMRC, and we'll do a coming out day photos with it. And so, right. So it's like silly things like that, but it sounds fun, right?
That sounds amazing.
Yes. So I will be emailing you after this to ask you who I need to get into contact with in theater.
I would be happy to dig through the mud and find out who you can contact to get to do that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's that type of thing. I want to do things where like people are able to be, to not only talk about like the issues that our community often faces at the intersections of identity, right? We come from complex places and backgrounds and experiences and stories, but I also want us to move to a place where we're celebrating, right? Like we have a lot to offer. We have a lot to share. Our stories are way cooler than anybody else's. And on top of all of that, we can kind of have some fun, and we can talk about really niche and funky ideas and create new programs. So it means a lot to me, and it means really trying to hone in on collective experience.
Yeah. Moving back more towards your background, what leading up to this, like, what makes you qualified to be the director aside from your passion for LGBT inclusion and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I guess I'll just tell a story, right? So I went to high school in southwestern Pennsylvania, outside of the city of Pittsburgh. And I was at an all-white high school and largely a low-income community. So I would say, like, if to frame that, like, the average property cost in our school district was somewhere in like the $30,000 to $50,000 for a house range, and most people lived in like an apartment or something like that. So I grew up I grew up in a really poor family. And I was always this really queer kid, right? Like, I was the one that wanted to push boundaries. I also did some really homonormative things. So at like 4 years old, I was like obsessed with Judy Garland, right? Who literally had died decades before I was born. But I was just like, oh my God, like, I am Dorothy Gale from Kansas. And so to be in Kansas now is very serendipitous, right? But that is kind of, I've always been this really queer and queer adjacent kind of person. And that followed me into high school and into college. And so when I got to college, the thing that I was most excited about, I went to Slippery Rock University, which is in Pennsylvania also. And I remember going to college and thinking, oh my God, like, I'm finally gonna just be so out. I was already out. I was out in high school. I'm gonna be so out. I'm gonna be involved in everything. I'm gonna be involved in all the gay orgs. I'm gonna do gay stuff all the time. I'm just gonna be the queerest kid on campus. And so that's what I did, right? So that really, for me, set the tone. And I was really fortunate to be on a campus that had an LGBT resource center. It wasn't very stable. There wasn't a lot of funding for it, but it was still our home. And it was still like that beacon and siren call for all of the baby queers on campus. And so that's where we went, and we hung out and we did those things. And I think I was probably a sophomore or a junior in my undergrad program when I realized, oh my goodness, you can do this as a career. Like this, you can literally get a degree that qualifies you to do this. And so that's student affairs, higher ed administration. So from about my third or fourth year, I started positioning myself to do those types of programs. I worked in the LGBT. Oh, yeah, that's what I was just saying. What was the last thing I said?
You were working in the LGBT, like you were talking about, like, I'm so excited to be like able to do this. And you started working in LGBT things.
Yeah, yep. So I was working in as a LGBT student leader. There was a campus-wide presidential advisory committee. So like how, like, it'd be like Chancellor Girard. So there was an advisory committee of queer folks, faculty, staff, and student representatives. So, right, so I got to do that. And then that was that point where I'm realizing, like, you can be a professional queer. Like, you can do this as your career and do advocacy and policy kind of work and really help to better people's experiences. And so from my undergrad, I was a longtime music major. I switched to psychology, and that's a whole other story. But part of doing psychology is that you had to do an internship. And I remember being like, well, I want to do something gay. Like, I really want to do something with the queer community. What is it that I can do? And they're like, well, we don't really know. We've never had anybody do that before. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go. I applied for an internship with the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, National LGBT org. They're super problematic. But again, another conversation. So I interned with them in the summer of 2014. I went back, I did a 5th year of undergrad, graduated, and then I immediately started my graduate degree, which was in higher ed. I continued to be involved with Safe Zone program, doing that kind of work. And then this really weird situation happened at the end of my first year in grad school. I had applied to be, I was working in orientation and what was the other thing? Advising. And it was all right. I was like, I'd rather be doing queer stuff though. So I applied to be the GA in the LGBT Resource Center at my graduate institution. And probably a month before I was supposed to start, I was at some other work event, and my new supervisor, the director for the LGBT Resource Center, tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Hey, Kris, I am leaving this job. I accepted something else." And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I really wanted to work with this person specifically, but all right. And I was kind of freaked out, and I talked to my spouse about it, and he's kind of like, "Oh, why don't you just tell them you want to be the director?" And so I just messaged the vice president and I said, "Hey, I think I'm qualified to do this job. You should hire me." And then she did, right? So then I did that for a year, and I really could have stayed on there. I loved that experience. I met incredible students, incredible faculty staff, did a lot of awesome work, policy work on campus. But I knew I wanted to do the PhD. And so my whole master's thesis, as well as all of my PhD training, has really been about how do we better understand the experiences of queer and trans students in the context of higher ed. So now I use a sociological perspective to thinking about this type of work. So the last 3 years has just been me doing research and writing. So I think that with the right amount of discipline, anybody can do this work. And I think that we need more of this work happening across the country. To date, there's about 256-ish LGBT resource centers across the United States in colleges and universities of about 4,000 schools, right? So there could be a lot more. And so I always say to any student that I meet, like, if this is work that you're interested in, let's sit down and have a talk, and let's figure out how we can start to craft your resume and CV to start aligning you to apply for coordinator or assistant director position. So I don't actually know that I answered your question, but there we are.
I think it did. And with that, what is your goal as the director? I understand, like, you want to work on some, like, events, like the coming out day thing, but, like, what do you intend to do? Big goal.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that I've been answering a lot lately. So I've now been in this position for about 5 weeks. This might be the end of week 4 or 5. I'm not sure. It's the end of week 4. So I'll answer it the way that I have been talking to everybody. I just don't like to do the admin voice. So the way I think about SGD at KU right now, the metaphor that I've been operating with is that the SGD Center is much like a painting, a canvas, right, that you would paint on. And as of right now, the center in and of itself, the physical space that people can go to, has really only been around for about 5-ish years. It has a much larger and much longer history than that, but like the physical space itself has had stability for about the last 5 years. And so with this metaphor, it's like in 1971, there was this canvas paper, right? The thing that you wrap around the wood. And that really started with the first LGBT and really LG organization. And so there's sketchings all over this thing. There's ideas and dreams that people have had, and there's a lot of signatures on it. And it has started to be outlined a little bit, right? When we got that center, it was like wrapping that canvas around the wood. Now we have a place that we can hang up the canvas. And yet we still haven't painted in like what we think that the center can be. And it's just because we haven't had long-term stability. And so right now, what my goal is to start to fill in that picture and to really make sense of the story that we want to be able to tell about what it means to be a queer and trans person, whether you are undergrad, grad student, faculty, staff, admin on campus, that you have a story about that SGD Center that is meaningful for you, whether or not that's contentious. All history is contentious. But in this space, we're trying to actually really set the stage for what SGD is. So my big picture things are, in order to start filling that in and adding another signature to the canvas, is to rethink about our mission and vision. What is it that we do? Are we a purely student-facing service? Probably not, because of where we're aligned institutionally. We sit underneath the Division of Diversity and Equity. So what I believe is that our first priority is to serve students, whether that is through support and advocacy, right? Learning who you can access in terms of medical and mental health services, or having a place to come and hang out or participate in events, right? That's one side of it. The other side, though, is to continue doing training and cultural competencies for faculty, staff, and admin. And I'm sure you've had some faculty, staff, and admin at KU who you've been like, this mofo, right? You've had that moment, right? So what we really want to do is also think about how it is that we offer training and support for our faculty, staff, and admin across campus, because it's my belief that when we're actually doing that work with those people, we are still serving students, because students may be having a better experience when they're interfacing with some of those folks who haven't had that cultural competency training. So that is kind of my philosophy for the work. And then in terms of like the everyday on the ground kind of things, that looks like really amping up our programming. It looks like really being engaged with our alumni. I loved meeting queer and trans people who graduated from the institutions that I went to, because it's like, wow, like they had a whole experience here and now they're off in the world as successful queer and trans folks doing things. And I can see myself through that. I love that. So programming, engaging with our alumni, thinking about how we might be revenue generating. And really what revenue generating means for me and in this work is that when we're able to bring in money, we're able to actually do more individualized services for students or group-based services for students. And what that might look like is okay, I did this event out in the community, I was able to bring in some money, and so now I can afford to send 20 students to this conference for queer and trans folks, the National Creating Change Conference, Mimble Tech, whatever it is. So revenue generating is one piece. Having better community partnerships so that we are connected with our Lawrence community a little bit better. Yeah, I think those are the big things that I'm really thinking about right now. And then also just making sure our student staff are really stable and our grad assistants are stable, and then hopefully getting that coordinator back in the next year.
Yeah. So I guess this is telling you a little bit more about myself. I have been trying since I came here to be involved in LGBT issues on campus. When I came here, we still had Spectrum, which was an old LGBT club, but it was right at the end in its final supernova before they fell apart. And so I didn't get very much involved because it was much more like this group of friends knew everything, and everyone who came in was just like, okay, things are happening, but they don't really interest me. And then last year, we started a new club called Sunflower Pride Coalition. And I was the communications director for that club, but we didn't get to do much because at first we were fighting for our reason to be there. And we didn't get a chance to really advertise that we were there. We literally played word of mouth to get anyone to ever show up. And so when it came to elections, after everyone was sent away for COVID, my spot was put up for a vote. And the person who was running against me was friends with everyone, and most of the members were friends of that person. And so that person got elected, and me, a journalism major, did not.
Yeah.
But now that it's my third year, I decided that I don't need a club to support me to be an LGBT activist. And I am looking to work with groups. I'm ready to go above their head and work with SGD directly to help advocate for the LGBT community and make the LGBT community on KU campus something active and proud, so we can advocate for our rights, so we can have LGBT people actively recognize when their rights are being disserviced either by locally in like school or locally in the like area, state, or even at the federal level. And we can also be aware of LGBT disservices internationally. I want to see the LGBT community more than just a couple of group chats online.
Yeah. And I'm sure that if you have been following our social media, a lot of what we've been attempting to do in the last few weeks has been virtual. And so that's been a real sticking point for us, trying to balance, like, we really want to be in community with students and with queer folk on campus, but also recognizing that the students that we serve in SGD and that the Division of Diversity and Equity serves broadly are historically the most marginalized, right? But also in terms of the pandemic, are more likely to be adversely affected by the direct effects of the virus or the residual effects. So whether that is being laid off, being furloughed, experiencing housing insecurity or other types of financial crisis, food insecurity, those types of things. So we've really been trying to balance what that looks like. And so probably next Friday, we will be rolling out our full LGBTQ History Month programming calendar. And so some of that incorporates in-person-esque, more like stop, say hi, leave, so that we're able to kind of balance that. We actually, like, it makes me ache that I am not seeing all of you in person. So when you reached out and said, hey, can we do this interview? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to figure out a way to harass this person, right, into having a long conversation with me about their experience. So I really appreciate you being really candid and sharing what your experience has been like. And I am aware that I frame SPC as the latest iteration in a long legacy of queer and trans student works on campus at KU. So SPC for me, and in my thought process, although it's intentionally trying to break away from Spectrum, that it formed despite Spectrum is for me a nod towards, you know what, this is where we're moving to next. Spectrum is no longer needed, and we're here to fill that void. And I love thinking about, like, the history of where we come from. So I am also sorry that was your experience. And I'm also sorry that y'all were trying to pull something together in the middle of this pandemic. Like, it's tough, and I know it is. So I appreciate you sticking through, and I'm really proud to hear, like, what it is that you're trying to accomplish for yourself in service of others. That's such a powerful framework to operate from in terms of, like, thinking about what you want to do with your life. Love that. So I'm not sure if there was a question there or if you were just sharing, but I love that.
Well, I feel like understanding, like, what has been the LGBTQ community on campus is at least a great way in our communication to, like, understand, like, where I'm coming from in asking you these questions, and, like, seeing, since you've just stepped into the position, what's the state of our nation.
Yeah, so here's another, so I knew there was a thing that I was missing as I was counting off before. One of the big ones for me is the Safe Zone training program. And there are, I would say, two schools of thought about Safe Zone. One's, maybe three. There's typically three of everything. There's always that gray area, right? So one school of thought is just like, oh my God, let's have Safe Zone training. We're gonna have that on campus. We're going to create stickers or plaques that people can put on their door. They attend this 1 to 8 hour training, and then they say, I know all things LGBT, put up my sign, everything's safe, perfect. The polar opposite of that are the folks who are like, actually, the Safe Zone program is a little bit BS, and it's BS, and this is queer and trans folk. This is another school of thought. That program is actually BS because what it does is creates an opportunity for folks to engage at whatever level they want to in a presentation, and then walk away from that and claim to be an ally. Not to do allyship or to do that work actively every day, but just to say, I did that training and therefore I'm an ally. And then there's folks in the middle. I find myself in the middle, and my explanation for that is that I think that if you are at an institution that does not, sorry, that's my little dog. I don't know if you can even see him over there. Scooby-Doo. Okay, well, hopefully he's going to stop. I think it's my spouse. So my thought process in the middle is that if you're at an institution where a safe zone training program does not already exist, you should really think critically about whether you want to do that and what tone you want to set for what that program accomplishes. And so if your goal should not be for people to just put up a placard and say that the space that they've created is necessarily safe, because any space is always on the cusp of being compromised, right? You can't control who walks in the door. You can't control what level of engagement folks have had with some really critical conversations, right? Like about gender and about sexuality. And so what we really want to do is create safer spaces, right? Where this is a space that is probably less likely to be compromised by folks saying dumb things. And so, yeah, so you want to think critically about that. But at the same time, KU already has it. And every institution I've worked at has already had it long before I got there. And so what I think our responsibility is to update the program so that folks are doing, of course, the Queer and Trans 101 kind of training, and then thinking about the intersections of identity in a second level of that training, and then finally thinking about like, what does active allyship look like? What does it look like to show up every day and have on your mind, how is it and what is it that I can do to be more inclusive? Whether we're talking about gender and sexuality, or we're talking about race and ethnicity, ability, socioeconomic status, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so that's another, I guess, visional kind of thing.
So last year, for a final in a class, I wrote a story about what we can do more for trans students on campus. Because we already have a lot of things in place, like you're able to change to your preferred name and write your pronouns in on your enroll and pay. You're able to get that changed across the board with the exception of housing because of some like fundamental error in there. And I've talked to members of housing and they're like, this isn't cool, but we will work to get that fixed. And like I wanted to get in touch with like KU PSO, but I wasn't able to before it was due. And I've gotten in contact with a lot of people on campus. And one of the things that I've come to discover is that we have the access to a training for like LGBT like awareness and stuff, but we do not require faculty to do it. And so that creates problems where like last year I had an issue with a teacher who kept misgendering me, even though it was my name on the roster, it had my pronouns there, and that person kept being like, well, it's too hard. And then when I sat them down and corrected them, just stopped addressing me in class.
Oh, wow. So,
yeah.
And you should not have had to do this. You should not have had to do any of that. But did you talk to anybody in D&E?
I had asked the previous director, TK, about it, and Z was like, that's not cool. Here's what I am looking for to do it, things with that, but Z obviously is no longer the director. Z probably graduated or something. Probably found a different job.
Yeah, so Z was our program coordinator.
Ah.
Yeah, and TK took a job in the northern Midwest somewhere. I've never interfaced with Zero, so I'm not 100% sure. But what you're pointing to is a larger institutional initiative that actually in terms of the pronoun piece specifically, my boss is Precious Porras, the AVP for Diversity and Equity and also the director for OMA. Mm-hmm. So her and her boss, who's the interim vice provost for Diversity and Equity, Jennifer Ng, they are working on this project, which they have labeled the Diamond project, and I can't recite their explanation for how it got that way, but it's because of the shape of a diamond. Can't explain it right now. I just don't remember the exact framework. But the purpose of that is to update pronoun usage institutionally in ways that are built into the like way deep background of IT, such that like if you were to fill out an admissions document, that type of data that you fill into that sits in the way background of all of your data. And so that would be back there and then would speak out to a number of different platforms. So Blackboard, HR Pay, your MyKU, all of these different things it would talk to. So that way you wouldn't have to update your pronouns in Blackboard, update your pronouns for this document or that document. It would just always be there, and you can update that by going into like your student information and selecting update. Right now, that process is supposed to operate in that way. Like I said, it's in the background, talks to everything. Right now, it's in the background and will talk to a few things. There's some type of IT glitch, and so that's a conversation that I'm newly being, as a part of my job, right, being placed back into that collective of people that's talking about it. So what we know is that there were two goals. One is to flip the switch on so that folks could start to do that and have it talk. And the second goal was to actually, and this was Dr. Ng, the interim vice provost, her strategy was actually to develop an educational campaign for faculty and staff specifically that is twofold. One, to let folks know that that option is there, and so that when they're talking to students who maybe are saying, like maybe they're in class and have been misgendered, or maybe they are doing that really outdated practice of having to email every professor and saying like, you know, please don't call me on the roster, right? Like don't use that name. We shouldn't have to do those things anymore. So her goal was to let folks know first that that process is there, and then second, to explain what it means, right? Because we have some folks who will act, as I like to call it, brand new, like this is new information, or that they haven't been exposed to these types of conversations before. So her responsibility was to help them to make sense of that and give it the institutional backing, as in it should come from a vice provost. Because even though I'm a PhD candidate, I still will be looked down on by some folks who have a PhD. And that's just elitism in the academy, and that's fine. So all of that said, yes, and it is an important thing. And I would say encourage you and anybody that, any other students that you are in community with, that if you think that this should be something that is being talked about more broadly, to keep making some There you are. Oh, you're muted. There you are.
Yay. Zoom.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
I was just saying that if you find, and maybe others that you're in community with already, that it's not that you will find. If you would like to continue making some good trouble, I would keep bringing this up to folks. And I certainly am, it's part of my job, but I would keep bringing it up because we always, often that student pressure helps.
Yes. I think in terms of questions, that's all that I have. And so in that, I will stop recording. However, I would like to have a conversation with you outside of this interview, if you would care to do that, if you have the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.